Now, Standard Bank is backing its investment in cloud and artificial intelligence adoption. This is part of the bank's broader strategy to push digital transformation through migrating customers to digital platforms. Today, we unpack this investment and how AI adoption is helping lower capitalization expenditure for the bank. And Business Days, Mudiwa Gavaza joins us with more insights. Mudiwa, always a pleasure. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Oljando.
All right, let's talk about this. It's very interesting when we speak about traditional banks,
Yeah.
what we'll call the big four traditional banks,
Yeah.
trying to then, of course, move on with the digital age. In my mind, it would be a complex transition because of the legacy infrastructure that sits there. Let's talk about how Standard Bank is doing it.
So what's most interesting about Standard Bank, right? I'm not a banking expert, but for as long as I have covered technology, we have understood that in financial services, there's this legacy issue that you're talking about. And fortunately or unfortunately, Standard Bank is this behemoth in the industry. You're probably the biggest player on the continent, but it's traditionally been seen as a laggard, in the industry. And even when you talk anecdotally to Standard Bank clients, they'll almost say, like the bank, we think it's reliable, but we don't get the technology first vibe that we get from some of the competitors. And obviously, the one that tends to be seen as being more tech first is F&B. So Standard Bank has actually been working quite a bit over the last couple of years, first trying to change how it operates, also putting billions behind some of its investments in technology, and also trying to just change how it operates so that it can increase this digital part of its operations.
Yeah, it was interesting with you. And I mean, of course, even as we speak of the other banks, competitors that are more seen as more digitally savvy, at some point in South Africa, we said that there'd be no need for brick and mortar branches by a certain time. That has proven to not be true. And I'm wondering also, maybe going forward with technology, but pulling back because, of course, you're responding to the market here. Sometimes slow and steady does win the race.
It does win the race. What is interesting about what we're seeing right now, when you look at Standard Bank, right, they spend about 11 billion on all of this tech just in the first half of their 2024 financial year, right? Part of their stated strategy is that we are trying to move people, onto the digital platform. So trying to move them away from the physical aspects onto the digital, on the digital piece, which is why when we talk about the 11 billion, you sort of then have to say, what's the increase in digital transactions versus your cost base, which then gives you a 28% increase in your digital transactions, but having only increased your spend on tech by 2%, right? So there's a stated strategy. What's been interesting is that, especially through COVID, we had all of these people saying, death of the bank branch, death of the banking hall. But in certain aspects, there are banks that are, still operating on that level, and it does well for them. I remember we had an engagement with Capitec, interestingly, last week at the AWS Summit. And interestingly, they were actually talking about the fact that part of their strategy was to stay servicing their bank branch network. And it has worked out for them. Whilst everyone else was closing down, they were opening up, but at the same time, they've also had a huge piece on the technology. So striking that balance, it does seem to be one of the ways in which banks have also tried to be tech first. What I also find interesting about the physical versus digital aspect that's interesting, I can admit that I am a Standard Bank customer, and one of the hardest things to do in certain parts of Joburg is just finding a Standard Bank ATM. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. And you see, because an ATM is sort of like the hybrid, right? It's the hybrid between your physical presence, but also the technology piece. That automated getting your money, paying and settling certain things. So it's interesting that on the hard physical side, you do see that push to reduce, but you're also seeing it on what has traditionally been your hybrid piece as well.
It's very interesting, Mudiwa, because another thing that I always think about here is just the fact that fintechs emerged, and fintechs emerged because banks were battling to really do some of the very quick digital transformation things, and that's because, like we said, legacy issues, lots of bureaucracy within a banking system that probably doesn't exist in a fintech here. But I mean, when I think of a bank like Standard Bank, there might be some legacy systems to really fix on the back end, but some of this can also come inorganically, Mudiwa. It can come in the form of acquisitions, it can come in the form of deal making, and I'm wondering if we've seen any other banks do that, or has it all have to be organic within the bank first, and maybe then an outward look from there?
So when it comes to Standard Bank specifically, it's probably one of the best examples because a lot of people use a platform like SnapScan, right? And that started off as an independent fintech, and all it did was to provide a way for people to scan QR codes and make payments that way. And when you see, other banks, will just have it as an inbuilt feature, but you tend to see that, Standard Bank, instead of going out and, making that, going and investing in a whole new department that's just attacking that problem, let's just go and acquire that capability in the market. What's most interesting about fintechs, and it's an interesting dynamic tech-wise between your traditional banks and fintechs, is that we were engaging with some consultants recently, and they were actually explaining to us that by some measures, I remember, I think it was Oliver Wyman actually published a list where Standard Bank actually came out as the second most digitized bank in South Africa, despite what people might perceive, right? And a big part of it is down to the number of things that people can do on that online platform. Because fintechs, right? Remember, the premise of most fintechs is that fintechs are usually solving for one issue. Most fintechs have found that one problem and attacking that one problem.
Payments.
Yeah, it's usually payments. Yeah. Whereas banks have to be attacking like a broad, swath of things. So when it comes to utility of your digital platform, you can have the best tech, right? But an interesting dynamic in the market is you might have the best tech, but if you're limited by the number of things that a person can do with that great tech, then a person sees more utility in a somewhat less advanced platform, but that they can do more things on. So your home loan, your vehicle finance, all of this stuff happening under one roof, as opposed to having one thing happening on the fintech side.
We don't have much time, Dave Mudiwa, but I must weigh on this with you. Yesterday, I spoke to an analyst about Standard Bank's reshuffle recently, executives reshuffle here. And some of the analysts really point out, it was actually Kuku Goiman. He said, execution risk has become so high. Bankers have had to change. It's no longer about being the deal maker, the corporate finance guy. You have to be tech savvy. And I'm wondering about that as well, just looking at from a skills perspective, from a skills development perspective, and how bankers as people have had to change in order to be able to respond the way we're speaking today?
It's actually very interesting because when you look at some of the lawyers, and I say lawyers because I think Sim is a lawyer. Lawyers have done well, in becoming CEOs of banks and all that. And you tend to see people coming out of, hardcore banking, especially CIB. Like to run Standard Bank, you must have, come out of the CIB function. Yeah. But to do well in almost all of these functions, tech is no longer just a second or afterthought. It's no longer something that is secondary. You sort of have to know and understand what's happening with the tech for you to, to do well and, advance yourself in the market. And when you see the speed at which a bank like Time Bank has been able to scale, to reach close to that 10 million number as quickly as they have, then it shows you that to stay competitive, you do need to understand you do need to understand the tech. And then I think just the last one is also interesting how certain tech pieces are being placed in banks, because I do believe that a big part of the tech function at a place like Standard Bank, not all of it, but a piece of it, is actually under the Chief Operating Officer. I stand to be corrected there. So you do see more executive taking on some of that tech responsibility, sort of pointing into that direction.
Well, all speaking about the future of work there, thank you for your time, Mudiwa. Always a pleasure. That was Mudiwa Gavaza. He's business writer for the Business Day.